Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the January 2025 U.S. History and Government Regents exam. In this video, we're going to be focusing on part 1, which are going to be the first 28 multiple choice questions. For those of you that don't know how this exam is formatted, the first 28 questions are what we call stimulus based, meaning that they're going to be based off of either a drawing, an article, a political cartoon, or a speech that's given in this box right here, and then you have a set of questions that follow. And when you're reading the stimulus, you're going to focus on two parts. The first part is the actual writing, very important, and the second part is this tiny piece of text down here. It tells you the source, where it's from. So this is the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which was published or made available on January 14th, 1639. So maybe that will actually reveal what this text is or help us understand what this text is. Okay, so let's read it. It says, "It is ordered, sentenced, and decreed that there shall be yearly 2 general assemblies or court, the second one on Thursday, April, the other second Thursday in September, the following. The first shall be called the Court of Election, wherein shall be yearly chosen from time to time so many magistrates and other public officers," interesting, "as shall be found requisite," which means needed. Okay, so anytime you see a word in brackets, that means that this is a definition of the previous word. So requisite means needed. "Whereof to be one chosen for governor for the year ensuing, and another to be chosen, and no other magistrate to be chosen for more than 1 year, provided that there will be 6 chosen besides the governor, which being chosen and sworn according to an oath recorded for that purpose, shall have the power to administer justice according to the laws here established, and for thereof, according to the rule and word of God, which choice shall be made by all admitted freemen, and having taken the oath of fidelity, and do cohabit with this jurisdiction, having been admitted inhabitants by the major part of town wherein they live, or the major part of such shall there then be present." Okay, so we can see here how the English is kind of messed up here, right? This is English written in 1639. It's a little bit hard to understand, but there are some key details that we're going to see here, and I've highlighted some of them. And essentially what this document does is it just agrees to vote for public officials, right? There's going to be 2 elections. One is going to elect a magistrate and other public officers, and essentially they're going to have to take an oath to represent the people to the best of their ability, because the people have taken the same oath. All right, so when number 1 asks us, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut represent an early step into the colonial advance towards what? Well, if you're electing someone to represent you, isn't that a representative government? Yeah, that is a representative government. If you're making a document and everyone in the community is agreeing to follow that document, and the document is talking about, okay, well, we'll have 2 elections, one to elect, judges, the others to elect governors, okay? What are you doing? Well, you're representing, or you're choosing who's going to represent you in that government, okay? This is the opposite of a monarchy because there's an election. Again, this has nothing to do about free press, and this has nothing to do about slavery, so it can't be choices 2 to 4. All right, number 2 asks, which colonial development was most similar to the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, okay? And obviously that's going to be the Virginia House of Burgess. Again, that was an early form of colonial government where every single state or every single part of the colony would elect representatives to go and meet in the House of Burgess in Virginia. Okay, again, very similar concept here. Instead of everyone having a say in the government, we all vote for who has a say in the government, and then they represent our needs in a bigger place. All right, the Stamp Act doesn't make sense here. That was a tax act. Okay, same thing with number 1. And finally, choice 3 doesn't make sense because the Proclamation of 1793 was just a border, right? That was just a proclamation that said the border of the colonies would not pass over the Appalachian Mountains, right? So 3 and 4 based on this. It is from George Washington, and it's the Proclamation of Neutrality, okay? So, whereas it appears that a state of war exists between Austria, Prussia, Sardinia, Great Britain, and the United Netherlands of one part, and France on the other, the duty and interest of the United States require that they should, with sincerity and good faith, adopt and pursue a conduct friendly and impartial towards the belligerent powers. So what George Washington's saying here is that there's a war between Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, and the United Netherlands, right? They're all allies, and then they're fighting that war against France. And as a new country, as the United States, we should be impartial towards the people that are fighting. To be impartial means to be unbiased, so we shouldn't take a side. And that makes sense. This is the Proclamation of Neutrality. If you're neutral, you're not taking a side. So when number 3 asks us what's the purpose of this, obviously it's to avoid being drawn into another war between Great Britain and France. If you're neutral to a conflict, you won't be drawn into it because you're not taking a side. All right, and this is very important for America because they just fought the Revolutionary War. Right? They just got their independence. If they enter another war, they won't have the resources to fight it, and again, the British might invade, and they might be under control of another monarchy. All right, this has nothing to do with Latin America, right? This is talking about a war in Europe. And again, if you're impartial, that means that you're not taking anyone's side. So negotiating a peace treaty, first of all, not only was it not stated in this passage, right? But also, if you're negotiating a peace treaty, you have to be involved in the conflict, which is the opposite of what being neutral means, okay? Again, choice 1 doesn't make sense because if you're trying to align with Great Britain, you're not being impartial, you're being biased to one side. Number 4 asks, which later United States foreign policy action is most consistent with the ideas expressed in this proclamation? And obviously that's going to be the Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine pretty much said that, or it was a bigger kind of way for America to stay out of the conflict of Europe. They said that if they banned Europe from essentially entering Latin America to further colonize it. They said, listen, this is our part of the world. Europe is your part of the world. Don't come in here with your military ships. We won't come to you with our military ships. All right. So it was a way of stopping colonial expansion and kind of getting America out of the heat or out of the line of sight for a lot of European powers. Okay. So again, they cut the rest of South America and, for that part, North America off from further expansion by Britain and France. All right, and what that meant was that Britain and France wouldn't be in that part of the world, so America would, again, be left alone. All right, ratifying the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo meant that America was not neutral, right? America was in a war with Mexico, right? So again, that would increase tensions between the U.S. and Mexico that would not be neutral. Annexing the Philippines, well, that resulted in a war with Spain. That's the opposite of neutrality. And finally, negotiating with Camp David Accords raised tensions in the Middle East, which, again, is not moving towards neutrality. All right, 5 through 6 are based on this. This is McCullivver v. Maryland in 1819. It says that, first of all, for those of you that don't know, this is what led to the creation of the Bank of the United States of America. It declared that the first Bank of the United States of America was constitutional. Okay, so if you just knew that, right, an important impact of the McCullivver v. Maryland decision, the correct answer here would obviously have to be choice 2, right? It determined that the creation of the National Bank was constitutional. But let's say you didn't know that coming in. Let's read this. It says that the result is a conviction that states have no power, by taxation or otherwise, to slow down, impede, or burden in any matter control the operations of the constitutional laws enacted by Congress to carry into the execution the powers vested in the general government. This is, we think, the unavoidable consequence of the supremacy which the Constitution has declared. We are unanimously of opinion that the law passed by the legislature of Maryland imposing a tax on the Bank of the United States is unconstitutional and void. Okay, so if we look through these answer choices, what was the decision here? Well, it didn't establish the power that states could overturn federal laws. If anything, they're saying that the supremacy, right, the Congress and the Constitution are the supreme law, right? The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. A state cannot choose to not follow the Constitution. This set precedent, right? This was literally the first case in which, the Supreme Court ruled that, the Constitution has to be followed by everyone. States do not pick and choose which parts of the Constitution they want to uphold. All right, choice 3 is wrong because, again, this has nothing to do about bicameral legislature, right? What is bicameral legislature? That's the Senate and the Congress, right? The Senate and the House, right? This has no mention about the Senate here, so that's false. This is talking about the Bank of the United States of America. It's mentioned right here. That's the main goal here, right? It's v. Maryland. This was a decision when Maryland wanted to impose a tax on the Bank of the United States of America, and because that was a federal entity, the Supreme Court was involved. They said, no, that's unconstitutional. States cannot impede with an order that was inside of the Constitution, all right? Again, choice 4, this says nothing about adding new states to the Union. Number 6 asks, the Supreme Court decision described in this excerpt is an example of which principle? So what happened here was that the Constitution overpowered a state's decision. And that sounds like federal supremacy, right? You have 2 types of government: federal government, which is the whole of the United States, and state government, which is whatever happens in each state. The whole United States, the federal government, right? The Congress, the Supreme Court, the president, right? They have better power, bigger power over the states. They have to report to whatever the federal government says. So this is federal supremacy because the Bank of the United States, a federal order, right, a law enacted by Congress, is overpowering a decision by states, right? So federal government is stronger than the state government. All right, so this is Thomas Jefferson's letter to John Beckinridge on August 12, 1803. It says that this treaty, which is talking about the Louisiana Purchase, must of course be laid forth before both houses, because both have important functions to exercise respecting it. They, I presume, will see their duties to their country in ratifying and paying for it, so as to secure a good which would otherwise probably be never in their power. But I suppose they must appeal to the nation for an additional article to the Constitution, approving and confirming an act which the nation had not previously authorized. The Constitution has made no provisions for our holding foreign territories, still less for incorporating foreign nations into our union. Okay, so again, if you don't know the Louisiana Purchase, America purchased the Louisiana Territory from France in the early 1800s. This was important because it gave them access to the Mississippi River, which is extremely important for trading, right? And it gave them access to the Louisiana port. Again, extremely, extremely important for trading. Also gave them pretty much doubled the size of the country, okay? So this was a very important purchase. Number 7 asks, which claim about the Constitution is best supported by this letter? So what Thomas Jefferson is writing about here is he's saying that, well, what do we do? Even if I were to purchase this, right? Even if I was like, okay, you guys, meaning the Senate and the House, can go ahead and decide whether or not we want to purchase this. Even if I let that happen, how am I going to incorporate this into the Union? He literally said that the Constitution has no provisions, no sections, no statements for our holding foreign territory and incorporating foreign nations into our Union. The law of the land, right? The Constitution, kind of the guidebook for how the federal government should act, if not the laws that the federal law and everyone in the United States has to follow, says nothing about how to incorporate this extra territory into the U.S. So obviously that says that the Constitution does not specifically state how to incorporate foreign territory, right, at this time. Only thing he's talking about here, all right? This has nothing to do about Supreme Court, nothing about adding articles. Sure, you have to add an article to the Constitution, but the main issue here is that he doesn't know of any section in the Constitution that says how to incorporate territory. That's the bigger issue here. All right. And again, 2, sure, the Senate had to provide money. They had to pay for it. But the main issue constitutionally about the Constitution here was that it never provided instructions on how to incorporate those territories. Number 8 asks, one major goal for President Thomas Jefferson in purchasing the Louisiana Territory was that it would help give the United States full control over the Mississippi River. Again, I said that previously. The whole point of this was so that they would get the port of Louisiana and the major river that came from it, and this would promote a lot of trade and economic export from that part of the country. Okay, had nothing to do with expanding the slave trade. If it did, then he would name that as a benefit here. Again, no. Again, it's not to establish a base to exert control over Caribbean trade. If you're in the Caribbean, that's like 200 miles away from wherever the end of the Mississippi River is. So that doesn't make sense. How can you exert control over something 300 miles away in the year 1803? Again, not that point. The point is to get better trade through access to the Mississippi River. All right. Number 9 through 8 are based on President Abraham Lincoln's address to Horace Greeley, or his letter to Horace Greeley. Okay, it says that, as to the policy I seem to be pursuing, as you say, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. I would save the Union. I would save it to the shortest way under the Constitution. The sooner the national authority can be restored, the nearer the Union will be to the Union as it was. If there would be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object is this struggle, which is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. Okay, so let's take a pause here. There's a lot of words here, but this is the main point of this letter, right? Paramount means, my ultimate statement, my ultimate desire here. Okay, so it's not to abolish slavery. It's not to get rid of slavery. It's not to save slavery. I don't care about slavery as Abraham Lincoln. I want to save America. I want to make sure that the Union stays. All right. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would also do it. So again, this is further support here. Again, slavery to himself isn't as big of an issue as America falling apart. He wants the Union, which is America, to stick together, and he'll do that under any means. Okay, and if I could do that and if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that as well. What I do about slavery and the African American race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. What I forbear because I do not believe that it would help save the Union. So again, his whole point here isn't to abolish or continue slavery, it's to make sure that America sticks together through this issue. So number 9 asks, according to this letter, President Abraham Lincoln's primary goal in fighting the Civil War was to obviously save the Union, right? He fought the Civil War after the South seceded from the Union. He had to fight a war to get them back to the Union, right? How can America be itself when half of it is a different country, right? When half of it separates or leaves the Union. So he has to fight that war to get them back. Okay, again, choice one is a tricky answer. You would think Abraham Lincoln wanted to free the slaves, but in this point in history, he just wanted to keep America united. All right. Number 10 asks what was one action President Lincoln took to achieve his primary goal? And that's obviously to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, right? In an attempt to continue to fight this war, he freed African American slaves, all right? And he abolished slavery in that part of the Union. Okay. Homestead Act was before him. Federal draft law, again, has nothing to do with how he actually with how he won the war. And number 4 supported the passage of the Pacific Railway Act. That was after him, right? So here we have a political cartoon. So this is supposed to say some sort of statement about America, right? Or what's happening at the time. So we see here, this is a representation of Uncle Sam. He has the stripes on his pants, and this is a big log that says Monopoly, right? And he's splitting this log. Someone is splitting this log over here, okay? So he's driving this hammer, which is going to split this log in half. Here we have a coal, beef, sugar, iron, oil, and steel trust, which are large companies that work together to kind of set a monopoly on the market, okay? And this is a photo of Teddy Roosevelt. You can see that he's a little bit fat. He has a little bit of glasses. What do you mean he has a little bit of glasses? He has glasses, he's a little bit fat, and he has this hammer, the U.S. Attorney General, that he's going to use to split this monopoly, okay? So number 11 asks, which statement most accurately represents the point of view of the cartoonist? Well, this has nothing to do about national parks, right? Sure, this is a log here, but the statement here is that he's splitting the log. The log is just a way to represent a bigger issue, which is trust busting, right? Or to dissolve monopolies. So the correct answer has to be choice 4, right? President Roosevelt must use the full force of the law to end the power of trusts, okay? President Roosevelt is not opposed to the regulation of big business. President Roosevelt wanted to regulate big businesses, right? I almost chose answer choice number 2 because I saw big business, but if you read it closely, right, it's saying that he opposes it. If he opposes big business, why would he be splitting it in half? Doesn't make sense, right? Obviously, he's using the full force of the law. Literally, he's using a hammer to go ahead and to smash all of these trusts apart, okay? Number 12 asks, what law is the cartoonist referring to? Obviously, that has to be the Sherman Antitrust Act, right? If all of these are trusts and you're splitting them apart, what's the opposite? Well, anti. So you're anti-trust. You're against trusts, okay? So we're going to keep scrolling, and here we have 2 photos that we're going to base our answer on. Or sorry, a photo and a map. All right, so here we have Mulberry Street in New York City. This was a heavy hotspot for a lot of immigrants. They would settle in this part of Manhattan. Again, we can see this here, a lot of different people here. They just settled there, right? And here we have the distribution of foreign-born whites in the United States. So what do you mean foreign-born whites? Well, it's white people that aren't American, right? Like Italians and English, people from Britain, right? People from France, people that came from Europe who appear to be white but aren't American white. They're not born in America. We can see here how there's a large concentration of them along the East Coast, especially in the New York area, which is where this photo is taken. All right, so number 13 asks, which conclusion is best supported by these documents? And that's obviously going to be 2. Northeast cities became a refuge for immigrant families in the early 20th century, right? A refuge is a place, right? A home. So a lot of these immigrant families who are fleeing oppression in Europe, fleeing war in Europe, are then going and settling, well, in the closest place from Europe, which is America, the East Coast, right? This was a major port of entry, and then this map heavily supports it, because if we just look at it, there's no other space that is this heavily colored other than the East Coast, right? There's some places in the Midwest, some places in the West Coast, but overall, right, by far, it's all settled over here, okay? So again, this has nothing to do about agriculture, had nothing to do about steel and transportation. And again, if immigration to Texas and the Southwest outpaced other regions, well, then this entire part of Texas and the Southwest would be colored black, right? Because the darker it is, the more population of immigrants there are, right? Or the heavier the immigrant population in that place is. So number 14 asks, the situation presented in these documents was addressed in the 1920s when what? Well, the situation was high levels of immigration, okay? And what the United States had to do for that was that they passed legislation that limited the number of immigrants, right? The Quota Act literally placed a quota on how many people from how many parts of the world we can accept as America, right? It was like 10% of the population currently existing. So if you had like 30,000 people from England, well, after 1920 or at 1920, they passed the Quota Act, which just said, okay, well, 10% of that can be let in. So only 3,000 English people can be let into this country, okay? Or 3,000 people from France or from Ireland, so on and so forth, okay? So again, they didn't get federal housing assistance. No, they just limited the amount of immigrants, right? Because America wasn't really supportive of and friendly to immigrants at the time. We were not, right? They faced a lot of adversity. They were forced into these very tightly packed and tightly crowded neighborhoods and slums oftentimes, right? So again, to limit that, they just limited the amount of immigrants coming in. All right, so number 15 and 16 rely on this message. It's President Theodore Roosevelt's second annual message to Congress, okay, 1902. He says that as a people, we have played a large part in the world, and we are bent upon making our future even larger than the past. In particular, the events of the last 4 years have definitely decided for woe or for weal, which means for poverty or prosperity, our place must be among the great nations. We may either fall greatly or succeed greatly, but we cannot avoid the endeavor from which either great failure or great success must come. Even if we would, we cannot play a small part. Even if we should try, all that would follow would be that we should play a large part ignominably or dishonorably and shamefully. Okay, so he's pretty much saying that America is a big player internationally, right? Across the globe, America is a significant power, right? And we can either do something about it to secure our power as a great nation, right? Or we can ignore that and still be considered a great nation globally, but we will just lose the opportunity to be even greater, okay? So number 15 says, in his 1902 message to Congress, President Theodore Roosevelt expressed support for what? Well, the creation of a permanent United States military, that was already created before that, right? He says nothing about the military here. 2, European colonialization of Latin America. Again, nothing was said about Europe. Nothing was said about Latin America. 3, traditional United States foreign policy of isolationism. This is especially incorrect because, again, if you're an isolationist, you're limiting your contact to the world, right? If all of a sudden you want to be a global player, you want to be a big player in the global scale, you want to be involved in international trade, international borders, you want the entire world to respect you, why would you turn and be an isolationist, right? Why would you close your borders and everything to the outside world if you yourself want to rule it? You yourself want to make yourself more assertive to the outside world, okay? So the correct answer here has to be 4, the expansion of the United States as a world power. That's essentially what he's saying, right? He says we have to be great among the nations, right? If you're isolating yourself from the nations, how are you going to be great among them? So number 16 asks, which action was most consistent with the ideas expressed in this message? And that's obviously going to be choice number 1, the construction of the Panama Canal. If you want to be great among the nations, if you want to show the world that, America is in control and power here, you're going to construct the Panama Canal. Why? Because it's going to connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans together. Not only is it going to be a crazy, massive, large project, right, to literally dig a part of a continent out, but then you're going to allow America to be able to transfer or to sail from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean, in one go, without having to go around South America. So essentially you're increasing America's ability to exert its power over both sides of the world because now our ships can freely go through that Panama Canal. It's going to save months and months on sailing routes, and we can also move our Navy more efficiently, right? Instead of having to, move our warships across South America to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we can just go through the Panama Canal. All right, open door policy, again, that would make us more isolationist. Signing consumer protector legislation, that's something domestic. That has nothing to do internationally. All right, and the creation of the National Park Service, sure, that's what he did. That's one of the things that Teddy Roosevelt did. But overall, that has nothing to do with securing your position or respect amongst other countries. All right, number 17 and 18, this is a source from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a statement on signing the Social Security Act. All right, so he says that this Social Security measure gives at least some protection to the 30 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pension, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health. This law, too, represents a cornerstone in a structure which is being built, but is by no means complete. It is a structure intended to lessen the forces of possible depressions. It will act as a protection for future administrations against the necessity of going deeply into debt to furnish the relief of the needy. The law will flatten out the peaks and valleys of deflation and inflation. It is, in short, a law that will take care of human needs and at the same time provide the United States with an economic structure of vastly greater soundness. So what he's saying here is that he's trying to implement the Social Security system. Right? What Franklin D. Delano Roosevelt did was he essentially passed a lot of legislations that would fix the issues that occurred during the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression, again, major economic downturn for the United States of America. So what he's doing with all these acts is he's trying to get the American economy to recover and rebound, and he's also trying to create programs that would prevent something as bad as this from happening. So the Social Security Act is, like he said, providing the United States with an economic structure of greater soundness, right? He's making it more structured, more sound, more stable, right? Number 17 asks, according to President FDR, a major purpose of the Social Security system was to do what? Okay, and obviously that's to provide benefits to the jobless and aged citizens, right? That is what Social Security does. It's your safety net. Okay, when you retire, you get your Social Security money. Okay, and he's saying that, right? It gives them protection to 30 million of our citizens through unemployment compensation and through old age pension. Number 18 asks, by signing the Social Security Act into law, President Roosevelt was keeping his promise that the federal government would do what? Well, obviously, number one, it would take a more active role in the economy to improve the well-being of their citizens, right? They're literally placing a bill that will improve the financial state of its citizens. If you're unemployed, the government will take care of you. If you're old and you can't work anymore, guess what? The government will take care of you. So if the government is actively taking a step to financially support you, well, that should be an example of how it's taking an active role in your well-being. All right? This has nothing about tax breaks. This has nothing about protecting banks, right? Even though that's what FDR did, this is the wrong document for that. And this has nothing to do about regulating the stock market, even though FDR did pass regulations on all three of those things, or all three of those things. Again, that's not what this specific regulation is talking about. So 19 and 20, based on these two photos, this is the War Ration Book number 4. Okay, it says that in accepting this book, I recognize that it remains property of the United States government, so on and so forth, right? So this is pretty much just a way or a ledger for the U.S. government to track how much food you have you've eaten or you've consumed this week, right? And this says that never buy ration goods without ration stamps, never pay more than the legal price, okay? And there's another statement here, important. When you have used your ration, salvage the tin cans and waste fats. They are needed to make munitions for our fighting men. Cooperate with your local salvage committee. Okay? And what this says is that we have to limit our use of food, right? Because when you're in war, all of the goods that your country produces goes towards that war because you don't want to lose that war. All right, so all the meat, all the food, all the eggs, flours, sure, your non-fighting population also have to eat, but a majority of that food is going to go abroad. And what they're saying is that don't use up all your food, right? Don't overbuy your food. Buy only what you need. And how are we going to control that? Well, we're going to use ration stamps, right? You have to provide stamps, which is what this book is. It's like a stamp booklet. This has all the records of you purchasing food, your allotment of food, okay? So the reason why we're controlling the amount of food, obviously, is to limit the consumption of critical, scarce resources, which is the answer for choice 1, right? Again, in a wartime, people need to be fed. So you're limiting the amount of food that's wasted so that you can send it abroad for your fighting men to eat. Number 20 asks, the public acceptance of the government rationing was based on the belief that it would do what? Well, it's not increasing the profit for farmers. It's so that America wouldn't be controlled by, the enemy, right? The fascists in this case, because this is talking about World War II. Right? So if you're okay with rationing, that means that you believe that it was fair, right? If people were okay with rationing, it must mean that they believe that it was basically a fair and equitable system, right? I get to eat less food, but at the same time, I get to support my troops across the world who are fighting against an enemy that I don't want to win, and eventually control the world, right? I don't want the Nazis to control the world, and as a result, I'm gonna eat less food. I'm gonna, recycle my tin cans to make more bullets. So that's just saying that it was a fair and equitable system. If you agree to someone, or with something, or with a choice, obviously you're saying that it's equitable and fair, right? So number 22 and 21 are based on President Harry Truman's statement about the situation in Korea. All right, so in South Korea, the government forces, which are armed to prevent border raids and to preserve internal security, were attacked by invading forces from North Korea. The Security Council of the United Nations called upon invading troops to cease hostilities and to withdraw from the 38th parallel. They have not done so, but on the contrary have pressed the attack. The Security Council called upon all members of the United Nations to render every assistance to the United Nations in the execution of this resolution. In these circumstances, I have ordered the United States Air and Sea Forces to give the Korean government troops cover and support. The attack upon Korea makes it plain and obvious that communism has passed beyond the use of subversion to conquer independent nations and will now use armed invasions and war. It has defied the orders of the Security Council of the United Nations issued to preserve international peace and security. In these circumstances, the occupations of Taiwan by communist forces would be a direct threat to the security of the Pacific area and to the United States forces performing their lawful and necessary functions in that area. I know that all members of the United Nations will consider carefully the consequence of this latest aggression in Korea in defiance of the Charter of the United Nations. A return to the rule of force in international affairs would have far-reaching effects. The United States will continue to uphold the rule of law. So what's saying here is that Harry Truman is reacting to the invasion of Korea by communist forces. Right, Korea was separated into North and South on the 38th parallel, which is just a border. What happened was that North Korea attacked South Korea past that 38th parallel, and now he's talking to the United Nations to kind of call that, or to warn them that, listen, South Korea is my ally, I have military bases there, they were attacked, so I'm going to deploy my troops and I'm going to push them out of the territory that I support. All right, so 21 asks, what was a major reason for President Harry Truman's June 27, 1950 statement? Well, this is made on June 27th, so we're talking about this statement. So one major reason was that the United States committed to a Cold War policy of containment. What he's saying is that no, it's not okay that communists can just go ahead and take over other countries. What America needs to do is he needs to contain them, right? He's literally saying that the attack on Korea makes it plain, without all doubt, that communism has passed the use of subversion to conquer independent nations, and that they will now use armed invasions and war. So instead of communism just, swaying people politically, like, well, this system is better, now what Harry Truman is saying is that, oh, well, they have to force the system upon other nations, right? And what he's saying is that the United States will continue to uphold the rule of the law. So we'll continue to avoid communism by containing it, essentially. All right. Again, this has nothing to do with the support of China. This has nothing to do about Japanese forces after World War II. Japanese forces did not occupy Korea after World War II. Even if they did, it's not talking about that. And here, number 4, the announcement of a plan to reunite North and South. This has nothing to do about a reunitement. This is literally taking back or reclaiming the South Korean territory, okay? Number 22 asks, what made the response to North Korea's invasion of South Korea different from past conflicts? Well, the Soviet Union and the United States were not allies. They were allies in World War II, not in this conflict. In this case, they were enemies. All right, choice 2, the aggression of North Korea ended when the Soviet Union intervened. That's false. Right, the Soviet Union helped support North Korea and invade the South Korea. Number 3, members of the United Nations supplied troops to defend South Korea. This is true. This is the only time that the UN, right, the peacekeeping organization, sent troops, right, or were themselves an invading force to help defend another country. Right, that's what made it unique. The fact that the UN actually intervened by sending their own security force and their own kind of their own military out there. Okay, number 23, this is a source from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Give Us the Ballot, okay? So he says that 3 years ago, the Supreme Court of this nation rendered in a simple, eloquent, and unequivocal language a decision which will long be stenciled on the mental sheets of succeeding generations. For all men of goodwill, this May 17th decision came as a joyous daybreak to the long night of segregation. It came as a beacon of light of hope to the millions of distinguished people through the world who had dared only dream of freedom. It came as a legal and sociological death blow to the old Plessy doctrine of separate but equal. It came as a reaffirmation of the good old American doctrine of freedom and equality for all people. Unfortunately, this noble and sublime decision has not gone without opposition. This opposition has given rise to ominous proportions. Many states have risen up in open defiance. The legislative halls of the South ring loud with words such as interposition and nullification. Methods of defiance range from crippling economic reprisals to the tragic reign of violence and terror. All these forces have conjoined to make a massive resistance. But, even more, all types of conniving methods are still being used to prevent African Americans from becoming registered voters. The denial of the sacred right is a tragic betrayal of the highest mandates of our democratic traditions and is democracy turned upside down. So what MLK Jr. is saying here is that, listen, at some point, African Americans were given the right to vote, which is a great decision. But in this case, the issue is the South isn't letting them vote. Right? They're either intimidating African Americans from voting at the ballots, or they're putting in measures that make it near impossible for them to vote. And that makes sense because people made literacy tests for African Americans specifically, right? They would have to, recite half the Constitution, or solve these impossibly difficult English questions to prove that they were intelligent enough to vote, which again is highly unfair, because they didn't make white people prove anything when they wanted to vote. Okay, so he's talking about these injustices, right? He's talking about the fact that even though African Americans by the Constitution technically have a right to vote, Southern governments did not let them vote. They made all these loopholes that African Americans had to go through to actually express that right, or to exercise that right. So 23 asks, what was one method that is used to deny African American voting rights mentioned in the speech? Obviously, that's going to be literally, literacy tests and poll taxes. Okay, poll taxes, you had to pay a very large fee just to vote for someone, and in literacy tests, you had to prove that you could read and write. But the issue is they would use they would have like nearly impossible questions to prove that right. Okay, so that's how the Southern governments prevented African Americans from voting. All right. Again, student protests, bus and boycotts. Both of these options are methods of resisting or kind of protesting the issues that were stated here. And federal troops were never deployed to stop African Americans from voting. All right. So this is a headline from New York Times. It says that Soviet fires Earth satellites into space. It is circulating the globe at 18,000 miles per hour. Sphere tracked in 4 crossings over the United States. Right. So this is talking about the first satellite launched into space by the Soviet Union. And number 14 is asking, why were Americans worried about the event described in the headline? And that's obviously going to be choice 1. They feared that the United States was being overtaken by the Cold War, or in the Cold War arms race. At this time in history, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were in open competition, right? Why? Because one was capitalist, while the other was communist. They had a fundamental disagreement in their economic systems, but as a result, they both thought the other side was evil, and because of that, they were preparing for this large war. This is the Cold War, which saw a very an immensely large arms race, right? Who can develop the better technology? Who can develop the better science? Who can develop the better weapons? And all of a sudden, when the Soviet Union launched this satellite into space, the United States started panicking, because they were like, oh my God, well, if they can launch this satellite into space, what can they do to our country, right? What if this was actually a weapon or something used to spy on us? And as a result, 25 asks, what is one direct result of whatever was described in this headline? So if all of a sudden the Soviet Union can launch things into space, well, America needs to pick up on that, guys. We need to go ahead and invent even better technology. So we're going to pass legislation to promote science education in schools, right? We want more scientists that can make even better satellites, that can cross faster or go to the moon, or do something even more impressive to show the Soviet Union that we're not behind on this race, that they are not the only people that have this, supremacy in technology. Okay. All right, so again, this is from Lyndon B. Johnson's special message to Congress called The American Promise. It says that every device of which human ingenuity is capable of has been used to deny the right of the African American citizen to coming in 3, 2, 1. So 26 is based on this source. It's from Lyndon B. Johnson's special message to Congress titled The American Promise. It says that every device of which human ingenuity is capable has been used to deny the right. The African American citizen may go register only to be told that the day is wrong, or the hour is late, or the official in charge is absent. And if he persists, and if he manages to present himself to the registrar, he may be disqualified because he did not spell out his middle name, or because he had abbreviated a word in the application. And if he manages to fill out the application, he is given a test. The registrar is the sole judge of whether he passes the test. He may be asked to recite the entire Constitution or to explain the most complex provisions of state law, and even a college degree cannot be used to prove that he can read and write. So what this is talking about is the amount of loopholes or hurdles that African Americans had to jump over just to get the right to vote. Right, they'd either have to pay a large sum of fees, or they would limit their access to the polling sites by closing them early, or they would have to make them take literacy tests, which were impossible. All right, literally, a college degree cannot be proved that the African American can read or write. Are you kidding me? You went through 4 years of college, and that's not good proof that you can read or write? So again, Lyndon B. Johnson is kind of expressing his outrage at this, okay? So number 26 asks, Congress responded to Lyndon B. Johnson's message primarily by passing the voting equality right in 1965. If the president and saying how terrible, the state of equality here is. Specifically, when it comes to voting rights, what is Congress going to do? It's going to pass an act that makes voting more equitable across the entire nation, right? It's going to say that states and state government can do absolutely nothing about limiting anyone's ability to write. So what this is saying is that it made in the Constitution a passage that made, come in 3, 2, 1. So what this Voting Rights Act of 1965 did was it pretty much made these literacy tests and the methods by which the southern polls were limiting African Americans from voting unconstitutional and illegal. So they can't play these dirty tricks to stop African Americans from voting. Okay. So number 27 is based on, again, another New York Times headline. It says that Clinton impeached. He faces Senate trial, second in history, vows to do the job till term's last hour. Right? So which constitutional principle is illustrated by these headlines? Well, if someone is getting impeached, that is obviously going to be checks and balances, right? When the Constitution was first created, people were very scared that the federal government would have more power over the state government. So they split the federal government into 3 branches: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Right? The judicial branch can go ahead and limit the laws passed by the legislative branch. The legislative branch can go ahead and choose whether or not the people that were elected to the executive branch can stay or not. Guess what? An impeachment is when the legislative branch, right, when the House and the Senate vote to kick a president out, or vote to start the process to kick someone out. Bill Clinton, obviously remained in office because the Senate did not vote to impeach him, but he was impeached because the House voted for that. So that is a checks and balances, right? If a president is extremely corrupt, or if so he does something that is unconstitutional, the other branches of the government have the right to call him out on that and actually make him lose his job as a result. Number 28 asks, which president faced the same constitutional challenge as President Bill Clinton? So in other words, the challenge here, the constitutional challenge, is the fact that he's being impeached. So which other president was impeached? Obviously Andrew Johnson was impeached. All right. So that's the end of this video. Those are all 28 multiple choice questions from part 1. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave a like. Hope you guys learned something, and I hope you have a nice night.